Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending our panel, the Digital Bridge, Transformations for Institutional Resilience. Thank you for showing up to us so early, especially our great colleague, Yurne. We're very appreciative that you woke up this morning. It's been great to have everyone here. So I just want to introduce myself real quickly. My name is Matt Jacobs, and I am the Digital Coordinator for the Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs. I oversee our kind of efforts to advance 21st century statecraft across the region and have been very much involved in working with the Slovenian government, CEP, and the organizers behind the BSF, and very honored to be here, but more importantly, I'm more honored to be here with an esteemed panel of both old and new friends here. Today we're going to be talking about what we can do from our various sectors to build the institutional resilience, particularly in the age of digital. As you've seen from the capsule description, it looks like part of the digital revolution was the idea that we're going to bring people together. There was this utopian vision that we could all connect with each other, we'd all share ideas, and this would be an incredibly proactive and advantageous platform for everyone. But recent discussions have pivoted and have now started to look at whether digital is actually a divisive societal plague, almost. So we have a number of representatives from across academia, journalism, and the private sector here with us, as well as the one token government guy. And we're going to be tackling this issue. Few ground rules. Aside from this introductory speech, I am going to prefer to give a light touch because I think these people have greater insights to offer than I do, but we want to encourage all of you to be active participants in this as well. We want you to be able to, if you hear something you like, clap. Show support for a particular statement. If you have questions, please do not feel free, or please feel free, do not hesitate. We'd like to call that a Freudian slip, so, but please feel free to ask those questions. We'll have a section at the end where you can do that, and if you are perhaps a little bit too shy, it wouldn't be a digital panel if I didn't give you a bridge to connect with me in the front of the room. I'm going to do it a little bit non-traditionally. You can find me on Instagram at maybe Matt Jacobs. It's an open account. Just send me a message if you have a question. We'll make sure that we can get the panelists to answer that. So with that, I'd like to kick it off and allow my panelists to introduce themselves. We'll start with you, Cornelia. You can sit down. That's like the stand to begin. We got here.
Thank you very much, Matthew, and thank you very much, the Center for European Perspective, for the invitation to be in this panel. My name is Cornelia Pjola. I'm an Associate Professor of Diplomatic Studies at the University of Oxford. Been working at Oxford for 8 years now. Initially, mainly on diplomatic issues, but more recently I started to work on the past 4 years on digital diplomacy, the use of digital tools by Ministry of Foreign Affairs and embassies. Initially on the bright side, which I liked, and it was a volume that we published in 2015, but increasingly more on the issues that we're going to discuss today regarding disinformation and what I call the dark side. And it seems to be the dark side taking over more and more, and what to do about that. I also set up a Oxford Digital Diplomacy Research Group with my PhD students, in which we actually try to engage with practitioners both in London and across Europe. We have different events. And there is this kind of feeling that collaborating with practitioners is beneficial for both academia because we can get insights from those who are in the front line, basically experiencing firsthand the type of effects that digital produces. So that's in short my 2-minute presentation.
Good morning, I'm Crystal Patterson. I am on the politics and government team at Facebook. I focus specifically right now on our global civic partnerships and elections integrity. And right now we're focused on obviously a number of issues that involve civic engagement, elections, and how people are using our platform. And how do we balance continuing to innovate and create tools for people to communicate with government and be active in elections and in their communities, while also trying to think about how we deal with bad actors without suppressing all that good activity that's happening on the platform. So excited to be here and talk to all of you today.
And my name is Natasha Briški and I'm coming from Slovenia. I am a journalist, also a political scientist. For about 2/3 of my career, I have been working for traditional media, most of it for the most watched commercial TV in Slovenia. I spent about 7 years living and working in Washington, D.C., where I reported on foreign affairs. very exciting times from 2003 to 2010, which was, you know, the time when Obama got elected. You could feel all the excitement, and it was also the time when all this new type of media was born, the social media, the Facebook, the Twitter, the Instagram. And after that period in the US and the experience there, upon my return to Slovenia, I said thank you, but no thank you to traditional media. And for the past 7 years, I've been working in the internet media, focusing on social media. I co-founded independent media network Metaslist, which covers mostly or deals mostly with questions regarding science, the gender equality, gender empowerment, and the media. I co-host 2 podcasts. One is on European Union, the other is on the media. And, you know, I'm going to be the one defending the media industry and criticizing it a lot.
Best of luck.
I know.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Matthias Sachs. I work with Microsoft, and I'm responsible for government affairs in several markets in Central Eastern Europe. I'm here for talking about these topics, mainly AI and everything related to AI. That's what drives us these days, and I'm very much looking forward to this diverse panel and sharing opinions with the panel and with you all here in the audience. Thanks.
So I don't know if you all had the chance to check out the full biographies of our panelists here, but we have 2 PhDs, and it's been a while since I've been in grad school, but I do know that every time you have to write to a professor, you have to define your terms. Right? And so we have this word resilience and institutional resilience in the title of this panel. And I just want to go kind of across the board for a minute, 2 minutes to talk about what would you guys define resilience as, particularly as we're talking about in the digital information space. Go ahead.
Right. So I think this is particularly important as a way of starting with a diagnosis. What exactly you mean by resilience here? The term resilience has been thrown out, you know, different ways: institutional resilience, societal resilience. But in basic terms, it speaks about the capacity of a system to withstand shocks, to withstand particular type of threats. And when we mean, you know, withstand, we mean about the capacity to tolerate a certain level of threat, the capacity to absorb, but also to react. And in the context of this information, I think it's particularly important. We see, for instance, the European societies. This information is not something new. It has been around, you know, for at least from a digital perspective for about 10 years. But there is a capacity to tolerate, and you expect that from European society because these are strong democracies, some of them more than others. And they have the capacity to withstand this kind of or to tolerate a certain level of disinformation. The problem that we see in the past couple of years is that above a certain level, there is a need to start to think about how to absorb, to develop mechanisms to understand what exactly are you facing. The eStratcom established by the European Action Service is, for instance, an example of institutions try exactly to deal with this problem of absorption, try to understand, to unpack, to understand the aspect of this information, what it means. And then we go into the more, the component that is more commonly discussed about how to respond in a more passive way or to respond in a more active way to this information. It's also important to understand this because then you can have a spectrum. You can measure resilience across European societies. A study that was done recently, was published recently, produced a map, and there are several indexes of resilience nowadays being produced. And it shows that actually it's a positive, it's an optimistic, but also it's a pessimistic finding. On one hand, it shows that some societies are more resilient to this information than others, but also the depressing fact is that the factors that make them resilient are very difficult to build. Like, for instance, education, right? Because if you have this kind of strong education that allows, critical thinking and, sorting out, what makes sense and what doesn't make sense, conspiracy theories, that's one aspect. But building resilience from an educational perspective takes years. The second point, the second factor that they identified was a pluralistic media system. It makes sense, authoritarian countries, and Eastern Europe now is turning in that direction, the various countries. create a societal echo chamber. So pluralistic media, that there is no one voice, but multiple voices in which you can actually hear different perspectives, makes sense. But the third one I found the most interesting as an element of societal resilience, trust in the state. And what Putnam in the 90s called social capital. The fact that citizens trust each other and the state. And that's probably the most difficult one to accomplish, but it's also the vulnerability that I think it's exploited the best, the most by disinformation. I don't want to monopolize, but
Yeah, actually, so that's really interesting, right? That's something that you had talked about is when you're talking about the ability of people to kind of process and capitalize on all this information, and whether we have the kind of cognitive load to undertake that. I kind of want to pitch this right over to Natasha, actually. So,
how is the media? How is the media adapting to? Can you hear me?
uh-oh.
Somebody needs to
You got it.
one.
There we go.
Oh, we're being controlled, so we don't.
So only two at a time. Yeah, how the media is adapting to new realities. That is what you think. What you mean?
Like I want to, so as someone who has been working in, who actually went from traditional media to new media, as Cornelia had just mentioned, there's this ability to process a certain amount of information and then having difficulty kind of internalizing everything. As a journalist, have you seen it become a little bit more difficult to kind of relay information out to people, to kind of get that to the right person, to say the right messages, as they're being bombarded by all sorts of information in other spaces?
Oh, no doubt about that. Short answer would be, it used to be, talking about Slovenia, like a couple of TV channels, a couple of radio channels, and 3 to 4 newspapers. So now the situation is you have like hundreds of publications, and everyone is having their voices out there, and you have to, you have people bombarded with information and not being able actually out of everything to see what is right or wrong, what is good information, what is the bad information, what is news and what is fake. I mean, the digital revolution hit the media industry quite hard. The changes that we have to adapt to are unprecedented. The technological advances are like huge, and most players in the media industry have been not very eager to adapt to new reality. I remember coming back from the US in 2010, 2 of us in a newsroom had Twitter accounts, and colleagues were making fun out of us, like, oh, you're posting when you're going for a coffee or who you met or things like that. A year and a half later, when I left the TV, they were organizing courses for journalists to learn the ways and means of Twitter. So that was a big change. Now, when you're looking for a journalist to employ or to work with, it's not uncommon to ask them what their social impact is. Do they have a presence on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter? How things changed. I remember going to the White House press briefings. The first row is always, and the rest of the seats available, they are reserved, or they were reserved for the big media. CNN, NBC, New York Times, Washington Post. In the meantime, right in the time that I was in the US, there was the first blogger in, I think, 2005 or 2006 that got a credential. So it's been huge changes for us, and for the past 20 years, we've been, concerned about us, where all this is going, and not so much about what kind of information we will convey to our public, what will be the quality of the stories, of the news, of the ways we try to connect with them. So it's been a struggle. The good news is that according to, I think I read a couple of days ago, digital media report, the Reuters Institute, that the media industry is showing some signs of slow recovery, and I would attribute that to we started to listen to what people would like to see more, the way that they would like to get this information, and so on.
So actually, so now I have a quick follow-up from Matthias, actually. So in the journalism space also, we're seeing an increased amount of reliance on automation. There are certain newspapers in the United States, for example, that are reporting on like minor sports that no one pays attention to, and the entire article itself is generated through automated intelligence. And so this is something that perhaps kind of creates the disconnect between the people we were supposed to connect in the digital space versus the people we're trying to reach, and possibly could undermine trust. This is where AI can create a product, give a service, but undermine trust in the institutions that they're benefiting. In fact, perhaps you can talk about whether you think this is a decent thing to have more AI roll out in these kind of spaces, communication spaces, or if you think there's a potential negative to it.
Sure. I think you mentioned a very important word here, which has been mentioned by my co-panelists here before. It's trust, and it's trust in technology. Because people won't use technology they don't trust. That's very clear. And adding to the first question regarding resilience, I think we have to define here what kind of resilience we're talking about. We can talk about technical resilience or societal or political resilience. And the idea is we can't just say, okay, we take care of technical resilience, our products are safe and secure, and that's it, and we walk away and leave people with that, and they just to believe us. We need to do more. We need to go the extra mile. And when you add the topic of AI here, which is a really new field for the most of us, and we see some companies moving forward, as Microsoft and others, and societies have to follow, let's say, and policymakers and regulators have to follow and look what's necessary here. And we shouldn't leave anyone behind here. We have a huge responsibility being the ones developing these kind of techniques. So you have to think about ethics and moral and responsibility and accountability and reliability. All these things are totally crucial before deploying AI broadly. And you mentioned a very important aspect here when it comes to media and public opinion and shaping of opinions worldwide and influencing political processes and the like. And we see this, and we take several steps, and I could talk about several projects we have here at Microsoft, starting by thinking about how we can defend democratic processes. We have something in place which is relatively new, where we try to help governments, parties, public entities to safeguard what they do and to be transparent and open and to stay democratic as it was initially meant to be, since they use our techniques, and we have to do this here. And I think Facebook can talk about this as well. Super important topic, and there's a huge responsibility here on the industry side, and I'll leave it like this. I could go in further and further. It's a big thing, and it's our thing at this point in time. I'll leave it like this for now, for later questions eventually.
But yes, I mean, if you can quickly follow up on the question of trust and technologies. I mean, you've been working on this area, for some time. And have you found, the holy grail? What seems to be to make people trust your technology?
It's an interesting question. Trust is the major thing. We are striving for that for like always. We haven't surely found the holy grail. I think no one will find the holy grail ever. We have to stay ahead of the debate, I think. We have this responsibility here. And I have the impression that a lot of big tech companies and Microsoft amongst them are doing a lot about this and fostering public debates, thinking ahead of the curve, really. We are doing things that you are doing in academia, that think tanks even do. We are not talking products and services, we are talking these topics as well. And that needs to be ongoing. This dialogue must be a dialogue, really, and all stakeholders. And when you go for institutional resilience, as here on this panel, as the topic we want to talk about, it's very important that we have really all stakeholders on board. It's not just us, it's not just the policymakers, it's NGOs, it's societal players, it's the media. They all have to be here, and that needs to be a conversational process, and it needs to be transparent. Because we are all accountable, and we need to be held accountable when having that dialogue and then developing things all together.
Actually, couldn't agree with you more. I think that hits to one of the main points of this panel is that I can say as someone who's worked in government, we tried to tackle this from a number of different angles. We tried to build trust between us and our citizenry and our publics abroad. And the problem is that when we're trying to work in isolation, we're oftentimes either doing things at best that are duplicative, rather. Another Freudian slip. All right. Yo, guys, it's early, okay? All right, give me a break. So we're doing things that are duplicative, or we are, at worst, undercutting one another. And I think there's very rarely an opportunity when we can get representatives from all these various sectors to come together and do anything that's sort of cohesive. And I'm hoping that that we might be able to identify some of those paths that we might be able to take, avenues through which we can achieve this, and perhaps even our audience can give us some ideas. So we'll keep working towards that goal, and hopefully that's what we're going to end on. We're going to bookmark on that. But we can't talk about trust in digital platforms without speaking to Facebook. Because Facebook, I mean, Facebook was probably what? How old is everyone here? So how many of you were first on MySpace or Friendster? That was your first social network? All right, a bunch of nerds. Okay. How many of you, your first real social platform that you joined was Facebook? Okay. How many of you still use it actively? Great. There's still trust in Facebook, yet the narrative itself has often gone against Facebook. And sometimes I think that's a bit intellectually lazy. And I would hope that you can, and Matthias, can you turn off your little thing? There we are. But I'd like to hear you say about how Facebook has valued the trust of its consumer base and what it's done to protect it in the last couple of years.
It's a great question. I think all of the themes that have kind of been circulating so far all go to this trust issue, including the question of resilience, because I think people's trust stems on whether or not they believe we're doing things the right way for the right reasons, and if we're doing it in a way that's sustainable over the long term. We are hyper-focused on user trust right now. If people don't trust you, they don't use your platform anymore. And obviously, all social media sort of relies on people interacting and wanting to be on there. And I think I feel, I've been at Facebook a little over 4 years, and I feel like I've seen us go through a few phases. And this one over, especially the last year or so, has been the biggest one in terms of us evolving as a company and how we think about things. Especially when I first started, everything was just how do we innovate next? What's the next cool tool? What is the next thing people want? And we're still doing that, but we're coupling it with, okay, what is the impact of all these things we've built? How do we think critically about how it's impacting people's daily lives? How is it impacting elections? How is it impacting governments and how they interact with people? And just our culture at large. And they're really big, hard questions. We have more than 2 billion people on the platform who all live in different countries with different mores, different values, and trying to reconcile all that is tough. But the underlying trust issue, I think we've tried to work on being more transparent so people understand better how the tools work and also what information we actually do have and how we use it. And have tried to make it so that it's not all small fine print. Some of that, that's some of the challenges. A lot of this stuff does get wonky and boring, and people don't necessarily want to read through the entire terms of service to understand how everything works. So we've tried to build some tools so when you look in your privacy settings, we'll walk you through them like one step at a time, pretty simply, so that you can see what you share, what you don't, and what it means. To this larger resilience point, I think one of the ways we're trying to be smarter is to work more collaboratively with folks in the world. It's not just about what tool are engineers building today. It's what are we hearing from governments about what is causing damage or is creating unrest, or what are NGOs seeing as they're working with activist groups on the ground who are really trying to influence policy, influence people, and is it working in the right way? So we are working with governments around the world for elections. We're trying to work with all the elections commissions. We are working with a number of organizations. I'm thinking specifically about elections, one, because they are so high impact, and obviously because it is such a focal point for the company right now. We're working with organizations like NDI, IFAS, on folks who really have great on-the-ground experience with elections that, as much as our team loves politics and has been involved in for a long time, you can't replace the expertise of those kind of organizations. So working closely with them. We're also working with the academic community. We have a research commission that's just focused on elections that we are funding, but that is operating completely independently. And so we'll get their results at the same time everybody else does. And I think all of these are an effort, one, to make us more resilient and trustworthy as a company, to get back to that theme, and also just to make us better at what we do. It isn't just about, can you write the right code? It's what happens when you put that code out in the world and the impact it has. And so we're trying to be more thoughtful about that. And as much as I don't think people think of tech people as mature, we are trying to mature a bit in how we think about our approach and do the right thing, and also realize we're not going to solve this in a day. And it's going to just be something we have to continue to go after and work on.
And so, you know, I imagine everyone up here relies on your product and your platform significantly to conduct their work. I know that I'm on it every day as part of my messaging responsibilities. And Natasha, have you had to put out, I mean, as a digital journalist, I'm sure you have to market yourself through tools like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc. Where is your trust in these platforms? What have you thought about this? Not to put all the attention on Crystal, but to lead to a larger point.
You put me in the middle, I think.
I did put you in the middle. I did put you in the middle.
There's one thing that we did at the media network I co-founded, and I'm also editing. So we are sort of moving from a traditional model of having in a newsroom, we don't have a classic newsroom or something like that, but we don't have like journalists covering things, because too often it proved that they are good for articles where you have to say answer those classic 5 W's, like who, where, what. But if you want to go deeper, and people are looking for also like someone putting things in context, we found out, and that's the same with me as a user of these platforms, that I'm looking for experts in the field, and at Metas List we are trying to empower them with the journalistic knowledge as to how to post, where to post, how to write that people would read, the length of the piece and everything like that, and trying to teach them how to do that. And people, it seemed like our statistics shows that trust them more if a scientist talks about some research and putting it in context with his colleagues. People trust it more. So I'm not turning, and I think that's a trend in media industry as well. So you're not gonna trust CNN or NBC or Fox News, just because they are CNN and Fox News and BBC. So you are looking for voices, for experts within either these networks, or it could be bloggers, or someone that is out of this traditional media world.
Hey,
And yeah?
hey.
Yeah? Oh, thank you. So that is where I think that things are moving on. I mean, I was wondering that research I stated at the beginning, I quoted the Reuters Institute Digital Media Trends, showed that people are not trusty to the news shared on social media. It's like 50% or plus 50%. I was wondering, are you worried? Sorry, did you just...
No, that's
No, that's a great question. Yes. We have a media partnerships team that works with journalists all the time, both in getting feedback on what's working for them and what's not, because we do think this can be a powerful tool to make sure folks are turning to real good journalists to get information, but also to see the impact, especially for folks pushing misinformation or this is a trend in the US, is that a lot of political organizations will put up news pages that just pushes, obviously, a certain perspective on the news, and they make it look official. They'll make the name sound really similar to, like, it won't be the Washington Post, it'll be something Washington that sounds very journalistic, but it's not. And one of the things we're grappling with is how to deal with that kind of content. We obviously don't want to be arbiters of truth. We don't want to be censoring. Like, our instinct as a platform is to be neutral as much as we can and stay out of it. On the other hand, it is harmful when misinformation is going around, especially when it has real social impact. So we do worry about this a lot. And again, that also undermines people's trust in our platform because we're allowing it. So it's a really hard needle to thread. It's a big challenge, and we're working on it. We're starting to work with more third-party fact checkers to try to, which again is, none of these are a silver bullet, but again, we're learning as we go, and trying to stop promotion or distribution of false information as much as possible. So we don't remove it, but we do make it so it doesn't spread as quickly. And hopefully are making it, we have verification for journalists, which means like if someone goes searching for you and you're verified, they're gonna find you and not the person pretending to be you or kind of posting off a similar name. And so we're trying to find technological ways to help overcome this and just have policies that sort of help nip it in the bud. But it's a huge challenge for us, and we are trying to work with the journalism community to improve the situation. So, yeah.
Actually, let's real quickly just kick that off to the audience. How many of you guys rely on social media to get a significant amount of the news that you see every day? Just raise your hand. Okay, perfect. How many of you guys have and like significantly trust those sources? Raise your hand.
Significant, define significant.
No, I'm not defining anything. Okay, we get 2 PhDs, I'm going to ignore that. Okay, so my question is, to any of you, and please feel free to shout out, if a number of you are getting your news from social media, but you don't trust it necessarily, why are you doing it?
Checking on?
Just checking up?
Yeah.
Just checking up, just want to see what other people are seeing?
Yeah.
Anyone else?
You want to see who's polluting the area so that you can counter that as well.
You want to see who's polluting the area, see
Or
who's...
also trending, just to see what's the dialogue going to take, where the narrative is going to take us. It's like the most popular way to view certain topic, misinformation and information.
Some more monitoring, more media monitoring. Okay, so, well, this gets to the question of trust, right? So, this is something that we've noticed in the government is that, any sort of democratic society is kind of built upon the idea that everyone has equal participation, everyone has equal say. And that is driven by the concept of objectivity, that everyone has equal access to information and that this information is informed, accurate, and has some sort of utility. But if we're starting to see that people are no longer trusting these sources, that's what really gets to an undermined trust, because it leads to a disconnect between either the government and the citizens, academic citizens, companies, journalists, etc. And I think this is one of the areas that we're seeing a significant amount of erosion in what we first saw and what you might consider the digital promise. And so, Cornelia, you've done a ton of research on this, and you've done a significant amount of research in terms of like filter bubbles and how people are kind of social matching on this. Do you feel that this institutional erosion in trust is something that is actually precipitated by the digital environment, or something that is simply just a continuation of trends that had always been present, but it is now being done at a rapid pace?
I think the worry that I started to have after, initially diving into this topic was that we're starting to look basically at the symptoms. We see this kind of digital disinformation coming through Twitter and Facebook and think it is because of this. But then what happens is that when we look at different societies in Europe, is that this digital disinformation, there are certain messages that, the point I make is that certain messages resonate better in certain societies than in others. So the question is why? And then you discover that actually there are cracks, there are social cleavages that lay dormant or latent. And what is information that amplifies and creates wedges in this society? And that I think is a worrying thought, because you can contain digital disinformation, but at the same time you have to go deeper and try to heal these societal wounds. And we see this, when we talk about Brexit, we talk about social inequalities in the northern eastern part of England. That was one issue that was exploited to a certain extent. We talk about Balkans, there are deeper wounds here in the region that can be amplified through disinformation. And Eastern Europe, there's a question of brain drain that affects all other countries, and that is exploited as well. So it's not only about the fact that there are, the fire code of falsehoods, this is called, that it pumped out a lot of false. Some of them are totally fake, totally conspiracies, nothing. But some of them stuck. because of they resonate with certain messages, and that distrust comes from the fact that the governments are perceived or not tackling these deeper issues. And I think that's one aspect that has to be taken into account as part of a broader strategy of disinformation. Not only the symptoms, but you have to go after certain deeper ones that seems to be, to resonate with the population in various societies, including the United States with the elections and so on. After 8 years of Obama, prosperity, nobody expected, and then all of a sudden there are deeper aspects that have been put to the front. So that I think has to make the two components have to be addressed in an equal manner.
So it's a bit of a human problem, more so than a digital problem, in your assessment.
At the society level, I think that there are certain issues that have to be addressed as well.
So then that makes the perfect transition to talk to Matthias about AI. So oftentimes I feel like people are trying to put a Band-Aid on this problem. And they would rather blame the platforms, they would rather blame technology than to address social cleavages that might have been extant. And the biggest scapegoat in the probably recent couple weeks has been, or months, or yeah, probably months, has been AI. This whole idea that bots, trolls, and these people are kind of getting a significant amount of attention. But we're seeing that data, for example, MIT put out a study last year that the AI-driven bots who are perhaps maybe amplifying misinformation, disinformation in the digital space are less effective than we originally had thought, that they don't actually have the impact of being able to convince anyone of anything truthful. Do you think, in fact, that AI, perhaps we can get better at engineering that so that we can use that as a source of amplifying truth and creating trust?
First of all, I have to say I'm not an engineer, clearly, so I'm not talking about this part here, but for sure, since we see that computers become more human, we have to bring more of the human aspects into computing. That means we need to talk about ethics here when we talk about artificial intelligence. And at Microsoft, we came up with the idea of having 6 principles that should lead our AI development and that should lead AI deployment. That would be, it needs to be fair, it needs to be reliable, it needs to be safe and secure, it needs to be accountable, transparent, and diverse. And I would take too far to elaborate on all these aspects, but if you take these principles and they all work together, we feel like we could close the circle and have something which is really workable here. And we have this dialogue ongoing, and we came up with this initial idea. Our chief legal officer and our executive vice president who runs AI and research at Microsoft, they wrote a book and published it a couple of months ago, which is called The Future Computed. And this book is available, you can buy it online, elaborates on these principles and what goes beyond. Also talking about the future of work, for instance, and how this is changing, how societies are changing, and what needs to be thought about. And we started that discussion, we triggered this year, and we want to have others joining us in this debate. And we feel this responsibility, as I said already, that we need to kick this off and to bring in our knowledge and be transparent about what we are doing here, and then have others joining that dialogue to tackle this, since we just can't walk and say, this is new and this is something you won't necessarily understand, but it's good for you and it's for the better. No, it's not that easy, totally not. And we need this ethical debate here. And that's something new to us here, and it's really moving away from talking about the technology, but talking about these aspects as well.
Okay, perfect. So I have a quick little follow-up on that. So I'm going to be the first one to kind of just throw a bomb out here. So Microsoft is a company that is driven by a bottom line, driven by a profit margin. You would not be investing money in AI should it not be something that would eventually be profitable for you. When you're talking about ethics and how you're going to be applying this, it's not just in the development of the program or in the idea of it, but eventually you're going to be selling that product. What is the accountability of Microsoft in figuring out who to sell that to or who's able to purchase that for what end? And at what point does Microsoft feel any sort of responsibility for ensuring that their products are not used to perhaps undermine the resiliencies that we're talking about?
Well, I have to stress here the Microsoft motto, which was invented by Satya Nadella a couple of years ago, our current CEO, who said, our mission is to empower every person on the planet to achieve more. And that means every person. So we think about not only our customers and forget about the others, but what every person should be able to participate and to take the best out of technology. That's the thing that drives us here. So it's a bold mission actually. But I think if we go after this, again, it's about cooperation. We can bring up a product, we talk about this transparently, we display this, and we make it very clear what it's all about, and then we talk to policymakers and regulators how we want to frame the societal frameworks for this, how we want to design regulation and policies so this is really landing well for societies and economies. And we can only do this in a dialogue. So we take our part, we walk the half the mile, and then reaching out to others to join us in this here. And we don't have to find a solution, and we have shared responsibilities. That is very clear. And that is shared with customers and partners and others which aren't customers and partners of ours, but will get affected by this.
Right, if I can jump quickly on this. I think one aspect that probably drives a little bit of discussion about trust between trust in technology is that a big issue of uncertainty. We don't know exactly what is going to happen. 10 years ago, when we were talking about Facebook and Twitter, there was a lot of optimism. Look, this is going to connect communities. This is going to. We didn't anticipate anything of the disinformation and the negative. And I'm not sure whether the artificial intelligence. I mean, there have been all kinds of negative scenarios about the role of artificial intelligence. It may turn out for the best or for the worst. But what I'm trying to say is that we are in a bigger transformation here, in which part of the citizen resistance or suspicion of what's happening in the digital age is that it's becoming oppressing in our daily life, right? During the Industrial Revolution, this was the master that used to train us. You have to wake up at 7 o'clock, go to the office,
He's holding his watch.
My watch, right.
His watch.
This is becoming irrelevant nowadays because what trains us every day is the phone, right? It's no longer, the 9 to 7 type of work. It's becoming more expensive. There was a report that I read that by 2025, the type of data that surrounds it and that basically regulates our daily life is becoming more intense. They talk about 10% of the data will become hypercritical because, for instance, without it, our life will be in danger. Sensors in cars, our healthcare monitors. So I think there is this kind of bigger picture that probably in terms of the data that we are now immersing ourselves as individuals, as society, that we still have to grapple with in terms of understanding the consequences. Artificial intelligence is supposed to come to address this kind of information overload to a certain extent. It's not sure whether that will help reduce the uncertainty or create even more. From a disinformation perspective, what I can tell you is that there is already fear that artificial intelligence is going to make things worse. 3 years ago, we were talking about disinformation and the problems in terms of trolling. Trolling was a big issue. Then 2016, we said, fake news is a big issue, right, in terms of what happens. And now they're talking about deep fakes, the videos that can use, all kinds of tools that basically imitate. So there is a sense that robot trolling, right, I mean, this kind of progression in which technology actually amplifies some of the fears that people feel in this kind of transformation of the digital age that we are going through.
Mayor?
Yeah, please.
Just a concrete example crossed my mind, tackling one of the issues and to display to you how we think about this, doing it practically, this collaboration piece I was elaborating on earlier. Take the topic of security and cybersecurity, which is a major thing, has been a major thing for years and years, and is absolutely major regarding AI. So cybersecurity, we see more attacks, we see more digital crime, we see even nation-state warfare in cyberspace. That's what we experience, all of us, and I think we all read about this. So what Microsoft did was actually our chief president for legal, chief legal officer, he came up with the idea of saying we need a digital Geneva Convention based on from the idea what the Geneva Convention was invented like decades ago. We have to have it in the digital space, and this is not just industry calling out for something like that, but coming up with an idea how that could be brought to life. So it's saying that we need governments to agree on certain principles, that they're not doing certain things in cyberspace when it comes to warfare and hacking and attacking civilians, for instance. Then industry needs to come together. We call that the tech accord. It's already existing, and Facebook is with us in this thing here. And I think as of now, 40 to 50 companies worldwide, mainly tech industry and telcos and others, joining us here. So they agree on certain principles to not do certain things and to do joint research to hinder certain cyber attacks and to fight for better cybersecurity. And then we need a societal debate. So we need an NGO who's taking up that issue as well and discussing things on the societal level, including players from various parts of society. And this needs to come together. And of course, we are advocating, and that's my profession here as a government affairs person for Microsoft, we are talking to governments and trying to convince them that this is a good thing. And they should be interested in signing up to a Digital Geneva Convention. And they should talk to other governments. And this is a global effort, by the way. And at the same time, it's a global effort to bring together companies in this tech accord to go for our very own responsibility, since you may recall this, the internet is owned by private sector. It's not owned by government, it's owned by us. So we have to take that share here. And then we need to bring in society as well. Just as one concrete example, how we want to try to do something about this concretely.
Maybe just this, Matt. No doubt that digital revolution brought us powerful tools and services, but unfortunately little knowledge on how to use it. So we are more or less learning by, learning by doing it, which means lots of mistakes. I mean, lots of trying what works, what not. And building trust that you mentioned before is probably #1 priority for us working in the media, besides trying to find a business model. Everyone is obsessing because we still are looking for the best ways and means to monetize on what we are selling. And building trust for us, let's say when we start podcasts today, it's always thank you for listening. We hope you're staying with us. If you have a time, please rate us on your favorite podcast provider and things like such, because your stars help us in the Apple algorithm and other algorithms find us sooner and get us more listeners and stuff. This was not the case 20 years ago. The media diet that we fed the people with was like, we choose out of the thousands of events, we choose 20 for you. And from 7 p.m. to 7:30 p.m., this is what you get. The revolution, brought changes in that field. You have many more options, and we have to fight, which is a good thing for a consumer. And building trust, in the line of my work, I found a lot of issues we have, like the scientists and experts and researchers are really hard to get on board again, because the media articles are usually like in TV, 1 minute long. Everything is becoming shorter and lots of videos and lots of photos, and you get a scientist talk to you for half an hour or 45 minutes, very excited about what he or she is doing, and it ends up being 15 seconds in the nightly news. And maybe the 15 seconds that they most often don't like, that is what they are telling us. Tomorrow is and research institutions has sort of, and the scientists pulled away from the media, like not trusting them that the piece that they are working on will be done as he or she wants to. So there is a lot of work for us in this field. Tomorrow is Juncker delivering State of the Union, the fourth State of the Union during his tenure, and I was looking for an expert on EU matters in Slovenia, and there are a couple of, but most of them are at some conference, and I had to...
This one? This one?
No.
This should be easy for you. Just throw a stone somewhere.
Yeah. But it's a struggle to find them. Instead, the institutions the research institutions and academia should be ready for moments like this, because you know that the journalists will be looking for an expert from the European Union field. You should also be, doing one step in that direction to offer them, these are our experts. Because if you don't do that, the current media model is a lot relies on ratings, and what kind of experts get a lot of attention, those who can provide the 5, 7, 10-second sound bites. You know, and we want, the times are difficult, we want the experts to put things in context. And as much as we have to work toward providing, you know, a narrative that would be fair to an expert and things as they are, they should be also making more effort. I mean, I was living in the US for almost 7 years, so I've seen that done in, by the US institutions, not so by the European ones. I don't know, maybe what's your experience? Do you have a good experience with journalists or bad?
No, just to provide a nuance to this, because it goes back to the issue of resilience, and sometimes I feel that we may overreact because we come from a different generation in which we learn these kind of tools, you know, at a later age in our life. There is a new generation coming, the digital natives, you know, our kids who grow up with these kind of tools, and sometimes I feel that they know more, a little bit than us. I remember last year on Halloween I came back home and my girls said, well, do you like how we decorated the house for Halloween? I looked around, I saw nothing. So, and then she showed me with the iPad, you know, all kinds of spiders and Frankenstein, augmented reality, and she decorated the entire house. I said, well, that's an interesting, because there was a particular app. So in a sense, you know, maybe that type of resilience coming from with the second generation, I think they are more versed to a certain extent in using these kind of tools. And I think it's important to draw that distinction as well with how the digital natives actually evolve. We've done a study on this with digital diplomats, people under 35. We put the benchmark like this. You say, well, under 35 you must be a digital native because you sort of, you know, grow up a little bit with that. And there are certain differences between those who actually learned this when they were in high school, you know, because they use it for socializing and all kinds of activities. They are more trustworthy of these tools than the others. The more you go in terms of, you know, the lifespan, in terms of age, the more reluctant, the more suspicious about the impact. So I think there is a gap here, and I think it will be interesting to see how the discussion will go on in 10 years, whether these kind of fears that we have now in terms of resilience actually will fade away towards, you know, the new generation basically come a position that we are now.
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask about that. So, Natasha, you're kind of hitting on something that we're getting information out there, and we're having kind of reduced attention spans. What we can put out there, what we can put on the digital, you know, space has to be kind of limited in order to capture everyone's attention at the best of our ability. And when we are talking about digital in the digital information space, you're often getting such a small snippet of it. You're getting that this, you know, this is fake news. This is. Bots are coming out, they're creating all these things. There's these kids in Dallas who are you know, manipulating elections. And it reminds me of that saying that a little bit of information is more dangerous than none. And how have we seen, and I think maybe we can ask Crystal about this, is how do you see the, just the kind of like top line, kind of very shallow information about perhaps the negative sides or some of the negative kind of approaches people have taken in the digital information environment? And do you see them kind of blowing that out of proportion simply because we've adopted ourselves and our media literacy tendencies to only take small bits of information and then quickly put it out there?
You want to
Either one.
Wow, it's a big question.
I
think-
got 45 minutes.
Yeah, so I think it's a double-edged sword because there is more information available than ever, and a lot of it is good information. One of the things I used to spend a lot of time talking to folks who worked in government in the United States and had noticed this trend of loss of trust in institutions a few years ago, and explained to a lot of these digital folks that Facebook, Twitter, and the internet are great ways to tell your own story without having to hope that the reporter tells the story that you want it to be told, and also to share expertise and to help people understand the work that your office, your agency, whatever it is that you're doing, because I think most people, your average person isn't really understanding what all government agencies do, or, you know, the types of projects, the types of impact that organizations have, and tools like Twitter and Facebook really give you an opportunity to tell that story in your own way. But because everybody's doing that, again, there's way more content than ever. We talk a lot at Facebook about thumb-stopping content, because most people are clicking on their phones, so how do you make it thumb-stopping? And the guidance has, even a few years ago, you could have an internet video that was 3 minutes long, and people would watch a lot of it, and now it's anywhere from 15 seconds. A minute is a long video. But again, that's like the first step of engagement. I do think there are a lot of opportunities for people to pay attention more if we do something that's engaging. One piece of guidance we give for our live streaming tool is actually to go longer. And that's one of the reasons people like it, is because there is an advantage to making the video longer. With live, you don't know where something's going. And so there's still that element of surprise. The example I like to talk about a lot is one of the first videos somebody did on live. BuzzFeed had a big watermelon, and they just kept putting rubber bands on the watermelon to see how many watermelons it would take, rubber bands it would take before the watermelon exploded. Millions of people watched this video that went on for a very long time, and literally it was just a watermelon on screen. And my guidance to folks is, if they will sit and watch that, if you're being interesting, they will stay with you. But you have to make sure you're still driving towards a point. I think one of the challenges with being creative in this environment, especially for organizations that are maybe challenged on resources, which I know for a lot of government folks is a real thing. You don't have as big of a budget as you like. You may not have buy-in from your principals. It just may be hard to do the types of compelling content that you probably prefer to do. And that's, people can sense that when you don't really have a message, or they'll get the gist in the first 30 seconds and then you lose them. And so I think the challenge is to try to continue to be creative, but again, it's hard with so much content in front. So there's no easy answer, but I do think there's an appetite for longer form content and for people to engage if you've got something to say. And I also feel like, sorry, I'm running on a bit here, but this has certainly been what I've noticed in the States, is that a lot of folks, whether it's advertisers, media folks, and I don't mean press media, I mean like entertainment, whatever, there's a lot of filler and not a lot of respect for people's time. And with the internet, people will cut you off if you're not using their time well. So I think if you're continuing to give them information that's useful, they're going to stay with you. And so focus on that. If you're just repeating yourself, if you're sharing something that isn't believable, trustworthy, useful, they're going to leave you behind. And so, I think that also is a key role. And yeah, stuff. Go ahead.
Yeah, just wanted to add to what she said, that statistics on our side, which is a small one, but I'm sure that for the rest the numbers are pretty much the same. But people value useful stuff. Now it could be like 5 pages long, but they would read this or listen or watch this kind of stories. I mean, the fact of the matter is that in 2018, one size does not fit all. So you have to be prepared to make like short articles, longer versions, 30-second video, a promo, 5 minutes. And the good thing is that the digital tools enable us. They're cheap, they're fast, we reach global audience, in much less time than ever before. So, but one size does not fit all.
No, absolutely not. So, it's always alarming when you hear the clapping coming from the other room, because you're kind of getting to the end of your time. So I wanted to kind of pivot back to the idea that we've brought together various sectors here. Tech, private sector, academia, journalists, government. Why do you guys think, Natasha, you mentioned that we were looking at, kind of a larger kind of tech-oriented Geneva Convention as document. And what do you think we could really be doing better as people across sectors to kind of inform individuals? Because just to let everyone in a secret, we kind of stuffed the audience with a bunch of digital communicators that we've been working with from across Europe, as the US government and the Center for European Perspective are trying to build their digital capacities. We're building networks between ourselves, but we're one sector. We've invited Cornelia, we've invited Crystal, Natasha, you've been there as well in an earlier iteration. But we still seem to be working within our own sectors quite more often than we are cross-sectorally. What do you think we could do to kind of break down those barriers and really start cooperating together to move towards a more cohesive product? And are you at all optimistic that we'd be able to achieve something?
I think from an academic perspective, one issue that I found particularly disturbing in academic research is the fast pace of the transformation. When you start writing, I mean, when first published this book in 2015 about the positive side of that was in 2015. That was ancient time, and issues come up constantly. Even on the disinformation side, the things that we discussed, last year to be quite important, nowadays, sort of, they left behind. So I think the fast pace of the transformation is one big issue that hinders this kind of efforts of collaboration, and also, the type of research that we do. One aspect a second aspect that I found particularly interesting is that when you discuss about resilience, you discuss about the individual resilience, about institutional resilience, about societal resilience. But it's also interesting to zoom out and think, about the global transformation of how these kind of new technologies are changing, whether they are changing relations of power in the international system in the same way like the Industrial Revolution has done. We've seen, for this, there was an interesting statistics 10 years ago showing that which were the most capitalized companies in the world in 2005, right? So that was 13 years ago. So you have Bank of America, you have Exxon Mobil. Microsoft was the only IT company in the top 5. Guess who are the most capitalized companies nowadays? Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, all 5 big tech companies. And that is a huge transformation of power. You don't have political aspiration, I guess, Facebook. But you see already some states sending ambassadors to you, right? The Danish have appointed a tech ambassador, not in Washington, but in Silicon Valley. They want to talk with you for certain reasons. They recognize the power that you have. But there are big transformations. Sorry?
That was very much a PR move. There are quite a number of consulates in San Francisco.
Well,
the only ones who found a great way to promote that were the Danes.
I'm not sure about that. The French did the same, with the special envoy. The Estonians, I think, they appointed a special ambassador for cybersecurity. So the move is spreading. So I think it's a recognition of the power that you see. But it's not only this kind of power that you see between states and tech companies. I mean, the emblematic case, if you think about Cambridge Analytica, was that you have a non-state actor, a company, using your platform, influencing elections around the world. That is power. It's based on a particular type of knowledge. So zooming out, I think
which is admittedly nothing new. However, we've had these political actors using data from other companies, other third parties, to do political advisement for forever.
That's right.
This is not a Facebook issue in this.
That's right. But I think now technology allows you to do this, more effectively, and I think you're going to see more and more actors doing this, harnessing this kind of power. So I think that the concept of power that we used to have it, very firmly Weberian. It's about the state. The state has everything, and I'm not sure whether the state, speaking about the Geneva Convention, is able to. Interestingly, the Geneva Convention is driven by you, Microsoft, and a few other tech companies, in trying to convince the states to do something.
We try to initiate it. It's not driven by us.
Well, yeah. So I think zooming out, I mean, that's another aspect in which you try to see, the local effects, but also to try to figure out, strategically speaking, how this kind of digital transfer, which is very deep. And the Google CEO mentioned that it is not that we produce data nowadays, up to 2003, all the data produced in the world up to 2003 we produce now in 2 days. So, yeah, that drives cloud business. Well, but at the same time, it creates huge pressure for new products and also for us to reset, the social and political relationship of the type of institution that used to have.
You look like you're eager to say something.
Thanks. Building on what Cornelia said and building on your question as well, I would start with an assumption. Every company these days is becoming a tech company in some way. With digitization and digitalization being a global phenomenon, we have to think digital, all of us. And the thing is here, people have to recognize from the 10 people company up to multinationals, including all the NGO players here and on all the other institutions we have across academia and research, we are all becoming digital. We are all digitalized. I mean, we've been talking about, when we talk about media and opinions, that was more on the private level, where you touched upon like before. But this is true for the company level, for the economy level, for the institutional level as such, also for governments. We are all digital. And we have to recognize this and to see what that means really. And it is not the tech companies who are building this web, let's say, in quotes, the web, who should lead the discussion. But we are the ones who for sure know about what's happening here, and we would like to share. This is what is happening here. This is what we are offering to you. This is how it works. And oh my God, now we see this influence coming out of our products. What do we do about it? We can't shy away from our responsibility, as Crystal said before, regarding Facebook and what steps they take. We do the same for our products. And cloud computing is the thing. And cloud is the backbone of everything digital these days. And it'll become more of a backbone, even more and more and more. And people will move to the cloud who would nowadays still say, well, I prefer on-premise, it's more safe and secure, and I have more a feeling of control. Well, I mean, we are already in the cloud, all of us. And this will be true for almost all enterprises in a couple of years from now. I won't follow the number, but that's just the reality. And we have to recognize this, and then let's start talking.
So you said that you want to kind of give, as companies, they kind of want to give access to the information and say, hey, this is happening, here's the product, blah, blah, blah. Who do you think should initiate the conversation about resilience? I mean, do you think this is something where the power of the state is still something? And I mean, if you can give some more power back to the state, it would make my life a lot easier. And appreciate it if we could figure that out. But who do you think should be responsible for initiating these conversations then? I mean, we've always got to have someone who is the catalyst, right? Someone's got to start something. Who would you say that will rest with someone like me, Cornelia, Crystal, Natasha?
Easy answer is all of us, a little bit. That's very clear. But I think I like democracies. And we have to fight for democracy these days, especially. I don't want to mention any specific regions on this globe here, but that's a necessary process. So I personally, that's my personal opinion, I would love for elected officials, democratically elected officials, to take the lead here, to take the responsibility, because they have been elected by the people. And they should initiate such a debate with the help of companies like mine and others. That is necessary debate, because it needs to be something which is really accountable in the end and reliable. And that's only if you have like a democratic process behind this and elected people being the voice of the people. Because you have to bring everybody on board here. It has to be diverse and inclusive. And you can only guarantee this by bringing in governments and political stakeholders.
Well, I think that discussion's already been started, and I think it's the public. The one thing we share in common is we serve the same people. And I think they've sent a really loud message that they want us doing better. And I think the message is also clear that they want government to play a role in making sure that we're doing what we're supposed to do. I think one of the things that was most interesting to me coming out of Mark Zuckerberg testifying in the United States was the number of people who came up to me and said, wow, those questions weren't great. And also, they really want to regulate you. And I think people expected us to be like, no, no, no. And our answer was, yes, let's figure out regulation, but also let's do it in the right way. Because some of the questions weren't great because people don't necessarily understand all this stuff. I think that's an important role we can play, which is helping people understand how the technology works so that the regulation works to keep people safe but doesn't stifle innovation or keep the tools from working the way they're supposed to. And we had to work on it collaboratively. I do think this is like a truly collaborative effort for it to work well.
And just a quick one, and also add into matters such as media literacy, and start teaching from the young age how to use the media, how to use the digital tools. They are powerful. It's not that we are just in the media selling photos and videos and words. These are powerful weapons. And you want to have people know how to use it, not to start in a high school. That's already too late, you know. But I also agree with you that the public is the one that has already initiated the debate. I mean, trust in the media, when you ask people, it's not at the highest level of all time, and rightly so.
It's always trust in politics.
Cornelia, did you have something to add?
It's also very important to be careful about what we wish for. So one interesting side effect of this information that it has pushed government closer to big tech companies. do we really want a good, very good relationship between governments and big tech? I mean, I understand, the negative sides, but then when they get too close, too razor sources
Do we have a
of
good
power.
relationship
That's
right now?
why we sat down here. We're already matching colors
As
of
somebody on the
clothes.
public policy team, I don't know that we feel like we're all in
But
this
I mean,
together.
the type of hearing of Zuckerberg,
Yeah.
that was the thing, it's more, and I think it also instigated this kind of global conversation. It was watched by millions of people,
Yes.
so usually nobody watches Senate hearings, but that was watched by many people. So I think that type of relation, I think how to do the collaboration is important, but I think, maintaining some arm's distance between government and big tech companies, it should be essential, fundamental,
Yeah.
because,
I mean, they should be keeping us in check, and the public too. I often, when I go out and talk to people and we do questions or whatever, and I ask for feedback, including the really negative stuff. And a lot of times people don't believe me, but I'm like, okay, somebody asked me something hard or challenged me, because we're not going to get better unless we know what's not working. And there is a ton of content, there are different issues in different places, and we need to know how we're getting it wrong so we can fix it. And I do think that's an important role government can play, which is just keeping us accountable and keeping us honest. So I agree with that.
We're going to help the public convey the message.
I'm not worried.
Yeah, I was actually going to say that I actually see it as almost a diversification of roles. So the government does have the power of the state to help regulate, within limits, of course. I mean, in the U.S., we tend to take a hands-off approach to a lot of this stuff, particularly as it concerns speech and other items similar to expression. But I do think there's a similar role we can all play. I wonder how much we've made it apparent that we are actively working together to try and create a space for citizens, because I think that's the one thing that everyone on this panel could certainly agree to without hesitation, is that we want everyone, for example, anyone in the audience, or anyone who happens to be listening to us, to be able to trust us, and to be able to be informed, and to be able to make decisions based off of the information we give them. Because we put faith behind the information we give them. We put investment and effort behind that. And so we all want them to be able to get to that point.
I do think that, we talked a little bit about the hearings that Mark Zuckerberg attended in the United States. I think that goes to a point I made earlier. Like, people paid attention to that and tuned in because it was relevant to them and something that impacts their daily lives, and they wanted to hear from somebody who's touching all of that stuff, how he looks at it, what he's thinking about in the future, and hearing him held accountable. I mean, those were long hearings, and it seemed like people watched a lot more of it than they would a typical government hearing, and I think it was similar with a lot of the hearings that happened over on the other side of the pond. And I think it just goes to, if we talk about this in a meaningful way and aren't talking past people or using jargon or getting into kind of bureaucratic talk, it'll serve everybody a lot better. Because I think people will be better educated and trust government and the companies more, because they'll feel like they're part of the conversation.
Speaking of not talking past the public, we're getting kind of towards the end of our panel, and I'd like to give anyone from the audience a chance to ask any questions they might have been holding on to, or they might have developed over the course of this conversation.
I didn't have a question. It's more like going on what Natasha said, that you need to educate people because Microsoft developing technology is neither good or bad, it's just technology. It's the end user that matters. We are end users, you're end users. Facebook as a platform is neither good or bad. It's just as bad as somebody that uses it or as good as somebody uses. So what do you think about how do you address issues with your kids, with young journalists? I think that they're the problem, to teach the public how to use the tools to benefit the public, not the other way around.
May I add something? And what is the role of education system? How are we going to prepare ourselves, our kids, for totally super digital world, digital factory, digital media, everything going to be digital? What is the role of education system today? And we should act fast, I think.
One more technical aspect here is, we would say we need to integrate more computing into the curriculum, generally. So not everyone needs to be able to code, but it doesn't hurt, let's say, to understand what that really means and how the fabric is made, how it works. So besides like the topic of future of jobs and what that creates, that's a totally different thing here, super important as well. But I think to start educating people what coding means, what computers are made of, what the whole thing is about. That's a start. That's a start from a, let's say, from a tech perspective. And then you can say more about content and education from a content perspective, but that's the tech layer. And that's what we would like to see, more computer education tools starting very early.
No, go ahead.
I think some of this, to your point about kids being digital natives now in a way that like we were not, learning how to be a good digital citizen, and I think about bullying that goes on online and just learning the rules of how to engage as a good person when you're using these tools. I have nephews and a niece, and you know, I hear them talk about kids being mean on these platforms. Actually, the school I went to high school with, we had 5 kids commit suicide within about 6 months. And a lot of the parents were afraid that there was a lot of activity happening on digital that they just didn't know about and they weren't sure what to do. We reached out and sent materials to try to help with online safety, both tools for the parents and for the school to help the kids learn how to behave properly online, and that includes not harming your fellow students with your words. But I think this is, we're on this bus that's sort of traveling, you know, at a very high rate of speed and trying to build it as we go. And I think this is one of the areas where we have to be really thoughtful and make sure we've got a real opportunity now with kids that are coming up to have them thinking differently about these kind of things and understanding better the impact that it all has and how to use it responsibly. And we have a safety team. We spend a lot of time on how young people use these platforms, how to get them to learn how to think, be thoughtful about how they do it. But I think we're going to have to lean into it more, and I think we're all going to have to kind of play a role in that, because we all have to play a role in it.
Yeah, I mean, to start with coding classes would be a good thing. To start with media literacy classes would help. Currently, the media budgets are not like very baroque, but very tight. So at least that is the case in Slovenia. Not much has been invested in educating journalists, but for younger people, for kids, it would be useful to teach them how to distinguish between news and fake. What is like, we have a case of a hurricane coming to hitting South Carolina. You know, it's again going to be a lot of fake photos, a lot of fake videos. But there are tools that help you, recognize what is real and what is fake. And education. I mean, it takes a lot of money, and the problem is that you don't get results in a month or two. And maybe that is the case because we want everything here and now and in like 5 seconds. But it's longer way it's long. It takes more time, but the benefits are there at the end of the tunnel.
And that's actually one of the areas where I think government really can play a significant role. I mean, the U.S. government in particular funds and has been funding media literacy programs and journalism training programs for 30, 40, 50 years. And we are very much moving towards this idea of doing a lot of digital media literacy and how to build that into the schools. And I think you see a really strong example of that actually coming out of Sweden. I think Sweden is instituted a digital media literacy program for youngsters, like starting in 1st or 2nd grade. Is it Finland?
I think.
Don't tell anyone, guys. I'm so sorry. It's somewhere over there. And but they've been already seeing a few results from that coming out even just 2 years shy of the start of the program. And I think that's the one area where government can kind of accept the slow pace at which we operate. We're much more comfortable being like, yeah, we'll see where it takes us, we'll ride this out for a few years. And for a program like that, which when you need to see the results have to kind of set in, that might be a role that we can play more feasibly, but of course we would have to incorporate the data that's coming from our friends on the academic side, and of course be working with our partners and platforms. And in this case, that's where that close relationship is really, really helpful. And so hopefully we'll be able to continue more of that, figure out how to sequence that better.
On the issue of education, I think probably it would be good also to, yes, we need to develop skills in order to adapt, to this kind of digital transformation. But what I found useful, not only from my personal perspective, but I think we've seen with our students as well, is that the issue of interdisciplinarity, interestingly, is becoming more relevant in the context of this kind of digital push or digital turn. What I mean by this is that For instance, the need to get a better understanding of how you position yourself in the society as a citizen. So there is questions about, going back to certain political theory, going back to sociology, and integrating that in order to make sense of how this kind of transformation affects your life and affects society. Already some degrees have started to include this kind of interdisciplinarity to make it particularly important and to avoid this kind of very narrow specialization. Let's learn, all of us, how to code and how to do the digital, because it's becoming too instrumental, and education has value in preparing you for life, but also a value in preparing you as a citizen of the society that you like to build. So there's this kind of balance between specialization and also understanding a little bit, given the amplitude of this kind of transformation that we are going through, what's happening. And you have the tools, and that touches back on the question of resilience as well, understanding what is going on and how basically to deal with uncertainty that is likely that we are likely to face in the coming years as well.
Do we have any further comments? Yeah, yes, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to praise you. I'm a former ambassador of Slovenia to Denmark, and it was mentioned, sorry, I see as a crucial point that the states take more proactive role in communication with those tech giants. You have mentioned that the Danes, they have appointed tech ambassador. So the state voice should be heard in order to preserve our democratic values. And institutions I see in the societies which has a longer democratic tradition are more resilient because they are more trustworthy. It's all about trust. So we need to, in a way, reinforce those institutions on the internal front, so to say. And on the external front, we have to embrace this. And the Danes, they did it with the appointment of this tech digital ambassador. I hope other states will follow, and those voices will be then concerted, so we can influence the tech giants to work more for the common good. You are working for the common good, but with a better kind of alignment with the states and the institutions, you will be even better. Please. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely agree.
Thanks.
Yeah. I saw one more hand go. We'll get to you. All right, we're switching again to your right hand.
Okay, just wanted to make a comment on AI, right, and the speed of change. So this won't stop, right? So I'm head of AI lab here in Slovenia, right? So pretty active working on, well, including with Microsoft and others, right? And so this won't stop. So whatever we've seen in the last years, this will just continue. And it's good to understand the invariant properties of, let's say, the societal change. So invariant in the sense what is not changing, right? So and we can then understand the change a little bit better, right? Let's say areas like complexity, size, and so on are studying this kind of field set. And so what we see, especially in terms of media, this imbalance of cost, right? So it's very cheap to make somebody dirty, but it's extremely expensive to clean yourself up, right? So this imbalance caused lots of troubles, right? Which was not in the past, right? The past, the resistance of the system was much bigger in the past. And so these chaotic properties of the system now are much higher. So, I mean, this probably will continue, right? Facebook and other systems like this are providing this conductance of the system or making it even higher. So, not sure if I have any question, really just a comment of this speed of change which won't stop, right? Innovations are in the pipeline, right? So we as researchers, or companies like Microsoft, Facebook, and so on, who have the whole pipeline of innovations which are there, right? And so we just need to be prepared for this. So this is my general comment, right?
All right, thank you. All right, let's give it back to Flamo.
Yeah, I was just thinking, going back to Professor Viola, as he was talking about the education and inclusion of the social media or digital media, and I think it played an important role in a negative sense that academia didn't get included in the process properly. It has been not necessarily alienated. It's been left out completely as something that it's a social media, it's a fun thing. It's like hip hop or rap. Let's just see what it's going to do to the society. But I think if the involvement was proper, if the books were being written properly, it was included in the academic system, it would be treated properly so that we can benefit the most, because it is affecting our society so much. It's actually driving the policies, driving national policies. It's affecting everyone's life, and we're treating it as, okay, we can get involved in the social media, we can be creative, we can treat it just the way we want, but it's becoming just a choice. I think it should have been treated quite seriously, included in the academia, in regular phases. We are teaching about economics, we're teaching about all kinds of things in school, but we're not teaching about social media. Yet, it's affecting our lives in the last 10 years, it's been affecting our lives so much, even a lot more than a lot of different people we study.
I think I can really quickly just defend everyone up here on that point real quickly. Yeah, you're right. It's something that has impacted us, but this is not the first medium revolution we've encountered that haven't been brought up in schools. For example, when we made the transition from radio to television, there was no one going on into schools being like, we need to have television, figuring out how to watch this, how to dissect and understand what's going on TV. When we made the transition to radio from newspapers, that didn't happen either. We are on the threshold of something new, so I don't think there's any fault to be given around for our kind of slow pace to kind of acknowledge that this is going to have as quick as a revolution. I'm just going to defend us on that one.
Yeah, I think I do think academia is really digging into this, and I think over time we're going to see a lot of really interesting results. But it does change quickly. I mean, 3 or 4 years ago, you couldn't live stream from your phone, and now it's pretty basic for most people to plug in and do that. And so I think keeping up with this stuff and studying it in a deliberate way, which I think is the purview of academia, is just hard to do, again, while this bus is like flying down the highway at a high rate of speed. So I think it'll get better, but I just think with the speed of innovation and the way this stuff is evolving quickly, it's really hard to put at anybody's feet that they haven't figured it all out yet.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I mean, from my perspective, I think it's in terms of programs of information education. There are a lot of them, in Oxford. There is no day, there is no workshop or educational programs. What I found interesting is that some of the ministries of foreign affairs and even embassies started to create this kind of media literacy program on their own initiative. Again, the Danes are leading the way here. The Dane embassy in Madrid started a series of podcasts, interviewing the Danish ambassador and a few others, talking about these kind of issues that we talk nowadays. And the podcasts are available, and they put it on Soundtrack, the platform. So I think it's starting to diversify. It's not only as a center of knowledge in university. Some of the universities are very deep involved in producing these kinds of material. Probably you're right. I mean, there might be more dissemination to be done from this perspective. It depends also whether high schools need to be taught about TV studies or social media studies. But there is a sustained effort to understand what is going on. And as I said, what I found interesting is that embassies are becoming this kind of hub of knowledge, trying to understand and to interact with the others.
But it would help, as he mentioned, to teach kids that when they have a wild party and posting photos on Facebook at 2, 3 a.m. when they are throwing up, that will haunt them at some point. Because when people are looking for future employees, they check the social media. So, but those sorts of basics, the problem is.
That's why you can only find me on Instagram. I made those mistakes when I was younger. I don't want anyone finding out about that. So, okay, so we're just about out of time. So I wanted to see if
there was one woman that
oh,
can we get her?
yeah.
Sorry,
We were trying to get it to you earlier, and then it came right back.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you very much for this chance. So I would like to ask actually all the panelists about this German law that's been in force this year that kind of tells especially Facebook to delete unlawful and questionable comments, especially related to hate speech, within 24 hours, and then for a week you have to sign if it's really kind of controversial but not really sure. So maybe I would like to ask what you actually think from your positions as like representing Facebook, journalists, academia, in terms of free of speech or like free of expression, opinion, also at the same time kind of regulating hate speech, which is really present and extremist tendencies in social media. And if you think that's a good idea, or the state should be regulating it like that, or yeah, what's your opinion on this? Thank you very much.
We always want to comply with laws of any country. We certainly think governments represent the people and the people's will, and we want to be responsive and responsible to that. I do think we don't allow hate speech as a general rule on our platform, even though we do try to not to remove content, but there are limits. We've decided that what we're going to allow on Facebook, and I think we want Facebook to be a place for people to connect and for them to feel safe doing it. And a lot of hate speech doesn't make people feel safe, and so I think that's sort of our baseline for why we police that the way we do. On the other hand, I think the nuance comes in what counts as hate speech, because some things are more sensitive to people than others, and this is something we argue about internally all the time. Much like a lot of our other content policies, you'd be amazed at how much back and forth there is before something is public about what we're going to be okay with and what we're not. And we do have very spirited fights sometimes about what's going to be acceptable and what's not, because we want to get it right and because this stuff is sensitive. So our official line, of course, is that we're going to comply with governments, and we're happy to do so. But again, we want this, our vision for Facebook isn't, we don't want disinformation and the hate speech to be where we start from in terms of how we're thinking about what the platforms could be and how people can use it. We should be considering that more than we have in the past. But we are trying to make it a place that's safe for people to talk to each other and to build community. And so our policies on hate speech are kind of focused on that.
Just to speak up quickly on this, I mean, the initiative was initially quite well received, especially in Germany. But then, criticism started to be made about whether it's effective, whether it can really enforce without creating a huge bureaucracy in order to monitor what is going on and so on. But I think that the larger issue here is, the risk of balkanization. Here in the Balkans, we're talking about balkanization of internet, in a sense, for better or for worse, internet works for us because it has no borders. Imagine that every single country, whether the Czech Republic or others, agree the same type of legislation, we'll find a different reason to enforce. Might be political reason, or nobody likes pedophiles, nobody likes hate speech, so there are certain things that probably the Geneva Convention may address. But the moment you go down the route in which every single state will going to create some virtual borders, I don't want this type of commons in my space, then I think the situation is becoming very more problematic and will go actually in the opposite direction. So I hope the German initiative will be the only one to be followed.
You said will be or will not?
I hope, I don't know, I hope it will not be imitated by many, because, certain countries have very authoritarian aspirations. So I can imagine what kind of national legislation will come out from their parliaments with respect to what is allowed and not allowed, to comment on their platforms.
There are basically two groups commenting the legislation in Germany. One arguing you are attacking free speech and you should leave it to the market will take care of everything. And the other is we should have a set of rules of how we engage with one another online. I am somewhere in between. I'm not sure if this particular regulation is something to replicate in other countries, but the thing is that when you go online, when you go on Twitter, even though you don't see me in person, your words, when you're attacking me or insulting me or being vulgar, hurt as much as if you would tell it to me in person here. So, but we don't have for our conversations online, we have 0 rules. We have agreed that when we drive outside in the offline world, when we drive, we have like the 50 kilometers per hour limit when you go through the city. You have 130 when you are on a speedway. We have nothing as such online. And I think we should have something. When we started our network in 2010, we were probably the first or one of the first media networks that was highly sort of regulating the comments from the, we said we welcome the comments, but if you want to criticize an expert that took time to write an opinion piece, a comment, a column, you will do it in a civilized manner. If you don't, it's not, I'm attacking your free speech, it's a private media company. If you don't do it the way it should be done, you will not be published on site. And we had like a couple of, you know, very stressed people out there that how wrong everything is. Like a couple of years ago, many and a lot of media sites did the same. If you are too big to be able to control what is being published, you are part of the problem. So I think, yes, we do need some, you know, some set of rules. It just can't be that you can do whatever just because you can't see the other person live. I'm not sure if the German model is the one for everyone that would fit everyone.
All right, and if you want the official U.S. government line on that, you can find me afterwards because we have to wrap this up so we can prepare the room for the next live stream. So I want to take a moment just to thank the panelists for joining us today and for engaging with us in this discussion, for all of you for sitting with us, and please feel free to find any of us roaming the halls after this. All right, thank you.